Some of you are calling it burnout. Some of you are calling it confusion. Some of you are calling it anxiety, mood swings, or a lack of motivation. But the deeper truth is this: your environment no longer matches your becoming. The room still looks familiar. The people still know your name. The job still pays. The city still functions. The routines still work on paper. And yet something inside you has been suffocating in silence. You sit in places that once felt safe, and now your spirit feels strangely dim. You keep trying to be grateful, trying to be mature, trying not to be dramatic, trying not to make a mess of your life, and still that inner restlessness keeps returning like a knock you cannot ignore. Because what once protected you is now containing you. What once sheltered you is now shrinking you. What once gave you stability is now quietly draining your life force. And the hardest part is that nothing may look wrong enough from the outside to justify leaving. That is why so many people stay too long. Not because they are lazy, because the prison is padded, it is familiar, it is socially acceptable, it is safe enough to explain. But you were not created to spend your life in spaces that only preserve an old version of you. You were not created to keep fitting yourself into containers you have already outgrown. You were not created to call spiritual suffocation loyalty. There comes a point where your soul starts sending signals. The fatigue that sleep does not fix. The irritation you cannot explain. The sense that your conversations are shrinking. The feeling that every day is repeating but you are disappearing inside the repetition. That is not always rebellion. That is not always ingratitude. Sometimes that is divine friction. Sometimes your life starts feeling too small because it is. And today we are going to talk about that honestly. Not recklessly, not romantically, not as an excuse to run from responsibility, but as a real conversation about environment alignment. Because there are places that help you unfold, and there are places that help you survive while slowly disconnecting you from yourself. And if you do not learn the difference, you will keep mistaking familiarity for assignment. You will keep calling your cage a comfort zone. You will keep trying to heal inside a setting that is actively training you to stay the same. So let this be your wake-up call. If your safe space is costing you your aliveness, it is no longer safe. If your comfort zone is muting your becoming, it is no longer comfort. If the place you keep returning to cannot hold the size of who you are growing into, then at some point, love for yourself will require movement. Not impulsive movement, aligned movement. Because sometimes the next level of your life is not blocked by effort. It is blocked by atmosphere. And once that truth lands, you stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and start asking the question that changes everything. Am I trying to bloom in the wrong place? If this message already feels personal, type 7777 in the comment, like this video, and subscribe to this channel. Let us begin with the stagnation trap. Because this is where many people lose years of their lives. Not in obvious destruction, not in dramatic failure. In slow misalignment, in environments that are good enough to keep them there, but not alive enough to help them grow. That is the trap. It is not always a toxic place. Sometimes it is just an expired place. A place that fit who you were 5 years ago. A place that held you during recovery. A place that gave you structure when you needed stability. A place that protected you when your life was more fragile than it is now. And because it once served you, you feel guilty even questioning it. So let me ask you something. Do you secretly feel guilty for wanting to leave? Leave the job, leave the town, leave the friend group, leave the familiar routines. Leave the version of life that looks stable to everyone else but feels spiritually stale to you. Do you feel guilty because you think wanting more means you are ungrateful? Do you feel guilty because other people would be happy to have what you have? Do you feel guilty because nothing is bad enough to justify the ache? That guilt keeps a lot of people trapped. Because they have confused gratitude with obligation. They think if something once helped them, they owe it permanence. They think if a place was safe during one season, they are disloyal for outgrowing it in the next. They think if they cannot produce a dramatic reason for leaving, then they should stay and silence the part of them that knows the fit is gone. But hear me carefully. You are allowed to outgrow what once protected you. You are allowed to need a larger life. You are allowed to need a different atmosphere. You are allowed to tell the truth when a place that once felt like shelter now feels like a ceiling. Because safety is not the highest goal if safety has become stagnation. That is the twist. Your comfort zone can become your prison long before it becomes your problem on paper. It can look responsible. It can look sensible. It can even look wise. But underneath all that apparent wisdom, your spirit starts paying the price. You become less curious, less creative, less available to possibility, less emotionally awake, less connected to your own desire, less willing to imagine anything beyond the current walls. And then one day, you wake up and realize you are not in danger, but you are not alive either. That is the cruelty of stagnation. It does not always scream. It slowly sedates. It turns survival into routine, routine into identity, and identity into a cage. And because nothing catastrophic is happening, you keep postponing the truth. You tell yourself you are overthinking. You tell yourself everyone feels this way. You tell yourself adulthood is just boring. You tell yourself maybe you are too idealistic. You tell yourself to be practical, to calm down, to stop wanting so much. But some of you are not asking for fantasy, you are asking for fit, and fit matters more than people realize, because the right environment does not only influence your opportunities, it influences your nervous system, your imagination, your standards, your energy, your relationships, your tolerance, your self-concept, your ability to hear yourself, and even your sense of what is possible. Environment is not decoration, it is conditioning. The room around you is always teaching you something. It teaches you what is normal. It teaches you what is acceptable. It teaches you how much of yourself can be expressed without punishment. It teaches you whether your expansion will be supported, ignored, mocked, or feared. It teaches you whether peace is possible, whether creativity is welcome, whether ambition is safe, whether depth has room, whether rest is honored, whether your next self has anywhere to stand. That is why environment misalignment can feel so disorienting. Because you may still be doing the same things, but they no longer reach you the same way. You may still be surrounded by the same people, but the conversations feel thinner. You may still be in the same city, but the air feels crowded around your spirit. You may still be on the same path, but your inner life is no longer consenting to it. And when that happens, people often think something is wrong with them. They call themselves unstable. They call themselves dissatisfied. They call themselves hard to please. They call themselves confused. But sometimes you are not confused. Sometimes you are root-bound. That is the example your soul may need. A plant can look healthy for a while and still be dying in a pot that has become too small. From the outside, there may still be leaves. There may still be color. There may still be signs of life, but underneath, the roots have nowhere left to go. They circle in on themselves. They become crowded. Growth slows. Vitality drops. The container that once helped now constricts. And if no one repots it, the problem is not the plant's potential. The problem is the environment's limitation. That is what happens to people too. You can become spiritually root-bound, emotionally root-bound, creatively root-bound, professionally root-bound, not because you are failing, because you have reached the edge of what your current container can hold. This is the recap. The stagnation trap is not always about obvious dysfunction. It is often about staying loyal to a container that no longer matches your growth. And when that happens, your life may still look intact while your aliveness starts fading. That is why you have to learn the difference between peace and numbness. Peace nourishes you. Numbness flattens you. Peace gives you room to breathe. Numbness makes every day blur into the next. Peace deepens your connection to yourself. Numbness helps you tolerate disconnection by making it feel normal. Many people say, "At least I have stability." But what they really have is predictability without vitality. And predictability alone is not enough to build a meaningful life. There comes a point where your soul starts needing not just safety, but stretch. Not just rest, but range. Not just protection, but permission. And when that point comes, the old container starts creating friction. That friction matters. Do not dismiss it too quickly, because friction is often the first sign that you have outgrown the place you are trying to remain loyal to. Now let us go deeper. Outgrowing the container is one of the most misunderstood experiences in adult life, because when you outgrow a place, it does not always stop functioning. It just stops fitting. That distinction matters. The job may still work. The apartment may still work, the relationship circle may still work, the city may still work, the lifestyle may still work, but it does not fit the version of you that is forming now. And that is why people stay so long. They keep asking, is this bad enough to leave? Instead of asking the more honest question, is this aligned enough to remain? Those are different questions. One keeps you trapped until things collapse. The other lets you respond before your spirit goes numb. Some of you are waiting for your environment to become unbearable before you give yourself permission to change. But wisdom does not always wait for disaster. Sometimes wisdom notices the signs early, the signs that your energy drops in certain spaces for no clear reason, the signs that you feel smaller after certain conversations, the signs that your imagination only comes alive when you are away from the place you currently live. The signs that your body feels heavy returning to routines that once felt fine. The signs that the version of you trying to emerge only appears in temporary glimpses because the current atmosphere cannot sustain it. These are not always random moods. Sometimes they are messages. And let me say something carefully because this part matters. Outgrowing an environment does not mean that environment was evil. It may have been necessary. It may have been beautiful for a season. It may have saved you. It may have taught you. It may have held you through a chapter when you needed exactly what it gave. But seasons change, and honoring what once helped you does not require imprisoning yourself inside it forever. That is where a lot of people get stuck. They think departure equals dishonor. They think movement equals rejection. They think growth equals betrayal. But moving on from a season is not betrayal when the season has already completed its work. You do not honor an old chapter by refusing the next one. You honor it by receiving what it gave, blessing it for its role, and telling the truth when it can no longer carry your becoming. This is why misalignment often feels so emotionally complicated, because a part of you knows you are changing, but another part of you is loyal to the life that helped you survive. A part of you is excited by what is next, but another part of you is terrified of what leaving says about who you were. A part of you is ready, but another part of you still measures goodness by familiarity. So you live in tension, 1 foot in gratitude, 1 foot in grief, 1 foot in longing, 1 foot in fear. That tension is real, but it does not mean you are wrong. It often means you are on the threshold, and thresholds are uncomfortable by nature. They are the place where the old fit has ended, but the new fit has not yet fully formed. They are the place where your current life still exists, but your spirit has already started leaning toward another atmosphere. They are the place where what used to be enough is no longer enough, but what comes next is not yet visible enough to calm your nerves. That does not make the longing false. It makes the transition holy, and some of you need to hear this plainly. You are not being dramatic for noticing that your environment is affecting your soul. You are not weak for being sensitive to atmosphere. You are not spoiled for wanting a life that does not just maintain you, but actually supports who you are becoming. Sensitivity is not always fragility. Sometimes it is discernment. Sometimes your body knows before your mind admits it. Sometimes your spirit feels the constriction before your logic can explain it. Sometimes your restlessness is not immaturity. Sometimes it is revelation. So now we need to talk about the signs, the real signs that an environment has moved from supportive to misaligned. Because many people stay trapped simply because they do not know how to interpret what they are feeling. They wait too long because they think they need a louder reason. They keep minimizing what their soul has been trying to say in whispers. In the next part, we are going to name those signs clearly. We are going to talk about how misalignment shows up in your energy, your relationships, your creativity, your body, and your sense of possibility. Because once you can recognize the pattern, you stop calling it ingratitude. You stop calling it instability. You stop calling it random dissatisfaction. You start calling it what it is, a life that no longer fits. Let us name the signs. Because once you can name a thing, it loses some of its power to confuse you. An environment misalignment is confusing when you do not have language for it. You think you are tired, but rest does not restore you. You think you are unmotivated, but your energy returns the moment you imagine leaving. You think you are emotionally unstable, but your clarity shows up the second you get distance from the place that has been dulling you. That is not random. There are signs. The first sign is chronic constriction. You keep trying to expand, but something in the environment makes you contract. You watch your words more than you should. You mute your ideas before they are fully spoken. You downplay your hunger. You soften your ambition. You edit your truth so other people can remain comfortable with the smaller version of you they already understand. And over time, that contraction becomes exhausting. Because even if no one is physically stopping you, the atmosphere is still teaching you to fold. The second sign is recurring heaviness that has no clear practical explanation. You can still function. You can still show up. You can still do what needs to be done. But beneath all that functionality is a low-grade grief, a quiet dread, a strange resistance to spaces that once felt manageable, a fatigue that feels less like overwork and more like your soul is tired of repeating itself. That kind of heaviness matters because your spirit knows the difference between effort and erosion. It knows the difference between challenge that grows you and atmosphere that slowly flattens you. It knows the difference between being stretched and being stifled. The third sign is that your imagination starts living somewhere else. Your body may still be in the current environment, but your spirit keeps leaning toward another one. You daydream about other cities, other rhythms, other people, other kinds of conversations, other ways of using your gifts, other rooms where your energy might not have to keep bracing. That does not automatically mean you are meant to move tomorrow, but it does mean something inside you is trying to locate breathable air. The fourth sign is that you only feel like yourself in fragments. Maybe you feel alive when you travel, alive when you are alone, alive when you are with certain rare people, alive when you are creating privately, alive when you imagine the life outside the current structure. But in the actual day-to-day environment, you go dim again. That is important. Because when the truest version of you can only surface in brief glimpses, the environment may be tolerating your existence without actually supporting your expression. The fifth sign is relational mismatch. You begin noticing that the people around you only know how to interact with an older version of you. They affirm who you were. They depend on who you were. They are comfortable with who you were. But when the deeper, sharper, freer, more honest version of you begins to emerge, they subtly resist it. Not always through cruelty, sometimes through confusion, sometimes through jokes, sometimes through silence, sometimes through making your evolution feel inconvenient. And if you are not careful, you will start shrinking again just to keep the social climate calm. That is why misalignment is not always about place. Sometimes it is about relational atmosphere, the invisible rules of a room, the emotional cost of being fully yourself there. And here's the twist. Misalignment does not always feel like panic. Sometimes it feels like chronic self-betrayal. That is the part people miss. They are waiting for some dramatic sign, a breakdown, a disaster, a clear moment of collapse. But often the deeper warning is quieter than that. It sounds like this. I keep abandoning myself here. I keep going silent here. I keep going silent here. I keep making smaller here. I keep negotiating against my own aliveness here. I keep choosing predictability over truth here. I keep calling it maturity, but it feels like disappearance. That is not a small thing. Because an environment does not have to be abusive to be misaligned. It does not have to be dangerous to be deadening. It does not have to be evil to be too small. That is why discernment matters more than drama. And let me ask you the question that may expose everything. What part of you keeps going silent in your current environment? What part of you only comes alive when you are away? What truth do you swallow there? What hunger do you keep postponing there? What version of your future keeps knocking, only to be put back to sleep because the atmosphere around you cannot imagine it? Sit with that, because the answer will tell you more than any personality test ever could. The places that are aligned with your becoming do not require constant self-silencing. They may challenge you, they may stretch you, they may even humble you, but they do not ask you to disappear in order to remain. That is how you know the difference. An aligned environment may make you grow, but it does not make you betray yourself to survive there. A misaligned environment may keep you physically safe while spiritually training you to become less and less honest. And once you see that clearly, you reach the next phase, planning the exit. This is where people either become wise or impulsive. Because the moment you realize a place no longer fits, one of two reactions tends to happen. Some people freeze. They keep gathering evidence, keep waiting, keep circling the truth, keep hoping clarity will become louder than fear. And because they never move, the environment keeps draining them for years. Other people swing the other way. They panic, they romanticize escape, they make abrupt decisions from accumulated frustration, they confuse urgency with alignment, they burn bridges that did not need to burn, they leap without structure and then blame themselves when the landing feels chaotic. Neither extreme is the goal. The goal is aligned movement, not rushed, not delayed beyond truth. Aligned. An aligned movement begins with a different kind of honesty. You stop asking, how fast can I get out? And start asking, how do I leave in a way that protects the version of me that is trying to emerge? That question changes everything, because leaving well is not just about departure. It is about transition capacity. Do you have emotional support? Do you have practical information? Do you have financial awareness? Do you have clarity about what you are moving toward? Not just what you are leaving. Do you have enough internal permission to stop making your own longing sound irresponsible? These things matter, because one of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to exit externally before they have fully exited internally. They are still asking their old environment for permission to outgrow it, still trying to be understood by everyone, still needing their current circle to validate the next step, still hoping the place they are leaving will suddenly become what it has never been. That keeps them entangled. But part of planning the exit is accepting this. Some environments will never confirm that you have outgrown them. Some people will never understand why you need more room. Some spaces only know how to bless the version of you they benefited from. You cannot build your future on waiting for unanimous emotional approval. So let us make the recap clear. Planning the exit requires three things. First, tell yourself the truth. Not the polite truth. The real truth. This no longer fits. This may have served me. This may still look functional, but it is not aligned with who I am becoming. Second, reduce chaos. That means gather information. Think about money. Think about timing. Think about timing. Think about logistics. Think about support. Think about what would create a bridge instead of a freefall. Not because fear should rule you, because wisdom deserves a seat at the table. Third, stop feeding the old environment with your life force while you prepare to leave it. Stop over-investing in what you already know you are meant to move beyond. Stop doubling down on a life you are privately grieving. Start conserving energy for the transition. That is the recap your nervous system may need. Truth, structure, conservation. Truth, so you stop gaslighting yourself. Structure, so fear does not dominate the process. Conservation, so your next chapter has something to stand on. And let me give you an example. Imagine a woman who has lived in the same town her whole life. She knows the streets, knows the people, knows how to function there. Her job is stable enough. Her routines are familiar. Her family is nearby. Nothing is collapsing. But every year, she feels herself becoming harder to recognize. Her conversations are repetitive. Her imagination only wakes up when she travels. Her body feels heavy every Sunday night, not because of one bad task, but because the whole atmosphere feels like a shirt she outgrew years ago. For a long time, she calls herself ungrateful. She tells herself to be mature, to appreciate what she has, to stop comparing her life to other possibilities. But eventually she tells the truth. This place is no longer helping me become who I am meant to be. Now, if she reacts impulsively, she may quit everything in one emotional wave, move without a plan, and then confuse transitional discomfort with proof she made the wrong choice. But if she plans the exit wisely, something different happens. She starts researching where she feels alive. She tracks what kind of environment actually nourishes her. She looks at cost of living. She saves intentionally. She updates her work materials. She talks to one or two grounded people instead of announcing her fragile vision to everyone. She begins emotionally detaching from the expectation that her current life must remain her whole identity. She does not despise the old place, but she stops asking it to be her future. That is aligned movement, not chaotic flight, not permanent delay, a prepared departure led by truth. And I need to say this to someone listening. You do not need a panic attack to justify a transition plan. You do not need to wait until your body breaks down. You do not need to stay until resentment poisons every memory. You do not need to force a season to become unbearable before you allow yourself to move toward what fits better. Sometimes wisdom leaves while there is still enough life in you to carry the next chapter well. That is not quitting. That is stewardship. Because when you wait too long, you often arrive to the next place with more exhaustion than vision, more fear than faith, more resentment than readiness. And some transitions become harder than necessary simply because the person delayed until their soul was nearly depleted. So listen to the whispers before they have to become sirens. And as you plan the exit, another important thing happens. You start grieving. Not because the move is wrong, because even right transitions involve loss. Loss of routine, loss of familiarity, loss of old identities, loss of being easily understood, loss of the environment where everybody knew your history, loss of the comfort of not having to explain yourself in a new room. That grief can surprise people. They think, if this is right, why do I feel sad? Why do I feel scared? Why do I feel torn? Because alignment does not cancel attachment. You can know a place is too small and still mourn it. You can know a chapter is ending and still love what it once gave you. You can know you are meant to go and still feel the ache of leaving what was once home. Do not misread that grief as a stop sign. Sometimes grief is simply proof that the chapter mattered. And if you do not make room for that grief, you may start romanticizing the old container again. You may start editing the memory. You may start forgetting why you needed more room in the first place. That is why part of planning the exit is writing down the truth before nostalgia gets poetic. Write down what has become too small. Write down what keeps going silent in you. Write down how your body feels in the current environment. Write down what comes alive when you imagine alignment. Write down the actual reasons this transition matters, because when the messy middle comes, and it will come, you will need a record of why you left. And that brings us to the next truth. The transition itself is rarely glamorous. There is often a space between old certainty and new belonging where nothing feels fully settled, where you question yourself, where the old environment starts looking simpler from a distance, where the new environment has not yet become home, where your nervous system is learning a different rhythm, and in that learning, everything can feel strangely raw. That does not mean you made the wrong move. It means you entered the middle. And in the next part, we are going to talk about that middle honestly, the messy middle, the season where your old life is no longer yours, but your new life is not yet fully formed. The season where many people turn back because discomfort starts talking louder than discernment. We're going to talk about how to survive that space without collapsing into regret, and how to recognize when alignment is actually arriving even before it feels completely comfortable. Because the truth is, the next right environment may not feel instantly easy, but it will feel alive. And there is a difference. Now let us talk about the messy middle, because this is the part people do not post about. This is the part no one romanticizes correctly. This is the part where many people start wondering whether alignment was just a beautiful idea and comfort was actually the wiser choice. The messy middle is what happens after you stop fitting in the old container, but before the new environment has fully become home. You have left something behind, or at least detached from it in your spirit. But you have not yet landed with both feet in what is next. You are in between identities, in between rhythms, in between atmospheres, in between atmospheres, in between versions of yourself. And that in-between space can feel deeply disorienting because the old life may start looking softer from a distance. Your mind edits, your fear edits, your nostalgia edits. Suddenly, the place that was draining you starts looking simpler. The people who could not hold your growth start looking familiar enough to miss. The routines that numbed you start looking stable. The container that was too small starts looking safe again, precisely because it was known. That is why the messy middle is so dangerous. Not because it means you made the wrong move. Because discomfort can become a convincing liar when discernment is tired. So let me ask you something. When transition gets uncomfortable, do you immediately assume you made a mistake? Do you treat uncertainty like proof? Do you let unfamiliarity become a verdict? Do you start glorifying the old chapter the moment the new one asks you to develop different muscles? Because that reflex sends many people backward. They confuse newness with wrongness. They confuse grief with misalignment. They confuse transitional anxiety with spiritual warning. They confuse the ache of becoming with a sign that they should have stayed where they were slowly disappearing. But hear me carefully. The messy middle is not punishment. It is rewiring. It is what happens when your nervous system is learning that unfamiliar does not always mean unsafe. It is what happens when your spirit is being stretched into a wider life than the one you knew how to manage before. It is what happens when the old coping structures are falling away, but the new inner architecture is still being built. That is the twist. The middle feels messy not because alignment was false, but because growth is rarely clean while it is happening. You are learning new streets, new conversations, new standards, new possibilities, new boundaries, new paces, new ways of hearing yourself. You are learning how to function without the old shortcuts, learning how to live without the old familiarity, learning how to make a home in a place where your identity cannot rely on old references anymore. That can feel raw. That can feel lonely. That can feel strangely tender. And that tenderness is not a reason to run. It is a reason to stay close to yourself. Because in the middle, old fears get loud. What if I ruined everything? What if I was just restless? What if I was ungrateful? What if I overestimated my need for change? What if the old place was not perfect, but at least it knew me? What if I do not belong here either? Those thoughts are normal, but they are not always wise. Sometimes they are simply the voice of an old environment trying to retain its hold on your identity. Because your old life does not only live in locations, it lives in habits. It lives in emotional reflexes. It lives in the parts of you that still equate familiarity with goodness, even when familiarity was quietly eroding your spirit. That is why the middle requires steadiness, not constant certainty. Steadiness. And steadiness begins with remembering why you moved in the first place. Remember the constriction. Remember the silence in yourself. Remember the numbness. Remember the shrinking. Remember how often you had to override your own soul just to remain acceptable in that environment. Remember the cost. Not to become bitter, to stay honest. Because once discomfort enters the new chapter, dishonesty becomes tempting. The mind starts writing poems about the old prison. The memory starts softening the edges. The soul starts craving the anesthesia of what was known. This is why you wrote it down. This is why you told yourself the truth before nostalgia had a chance to romanticize what no longer fit. And let me say this plainly. You are allowed to miss what you were still meant to leave. Missing it does not mean it was meant to be your future. Loving parts of it does not mean you belonged there forever. Grieving it does not mean you should return to it. That is the recap your heart may need. The messy middle includes doubt, grief, disorientation, and tenderness. But none of those automatically mean you are off course. Sometimes they are simply the emotional weather of transition. And let me give you an example. Imagine someone who finally leaves the town, job, or circle they had outgrown. At first, there is relief, breathing room, a sense that something true has begun. Then a few weeks later, reality sets in. the new place is not instantly magical. There are still bills, still awkward moments, still lonely evenings, still practical problems, still days where no one fully knows them yet, still moments where their courage feels expensive, and in one of those moments the old life starts calling them back emotionally. Not always literally. Sometimes it just appears in memory, in fantasy, in the temptation to return to what was easy to explain. This is the moment that matters. If they interpret the discomfort as failure, they may run back too soon. Not because the old environment fits, because the new one has not become comfortable yet. But if they understand the middle, they do something wiser. They breathe. They let the discomfort exist without worshiping it. They remind themselves that rootedness takes time. They keep building, keep listening, keep learning the new atmosphere instead of demanding instant certainty from it. That is how transition becomes transformation instead of just relocation. Because the goal was never simply to leave. The goal was to arrive more honestly. And that brings us to the final movement. Arriving at alignment. This part is beautiful, but it is subtler than people imagine. Alignment does not always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as exhale. Sometimes it sounds like this: I do not have to brace as much here. I can hear myself think here. My creativity returns here. My body softens here. My truth does not have to fight for air here. I am still growing, but I am no longer constantly shrinking just to remain. That is alignment. It is not perfection. It is fit. The right environment will still challenge you, still stretch you, still ask things of you, still expose edges that need growth, but it will do so without requiring self-betrayal as the price of participation. That is how you know. In alignment, your energy is not consumed by pretending. In alignment, your gifts have room to breathe. In alignment, your nervous system is not constantly translating the room into danger. In alignment, your future feels reachable in your body, not just attractive in theory, and there is often a strange simplicity to it. You may notice you laugh more easily, rest more deeply, create more naturally, discern more clearly, need less recovery time after ordinary interactions, feel less fragmented at the end of the day, feel more willing to imagine a future instead of merely survive a schedule. Those things matter because many people expect the right environment to make them feel endlessly excited, but often the deeper marker is this: you feel more like yourself there, not the traumatized self, not the edited self, not the overly palatable self, the truer self. And that can be surprisingly quiet at first. It may not feel dramatic. It may feel clean. That is the example your spirit may need. Imagine finally entering a place where you do not have to spend half your energy managing the atmosphere. A place where your conversations expand instead of collapse. A place where your standards do not make you an outsider. A place where your ideas do not have to beg for legitimacy. A place where your nervous system does not call your own growth a threat. You may not scream. You may simply breathe differently. You may realize that peace is not boring. It is spacious. You may realize that support is not weakness. It is nourishment. You may realize that being seen accurately does not feel dramatic. It feels relieving. That is arrival. And no, arrival does not mean all fear disappears. It does not mean every day becomes easy. It does not mean the new chapter never asks more of you. What it means is that the atmosphere around your becoming is now working with you instead of against you. That changes everything. Because once environment and identity start cooperating, growth no longer costs quite so much blood. You do not have to force every inch. You do not have to fight the room for the right to exist in it. You begin spending less energy surviving your surroundings and more energy inhabiting your actual life. That is divine relocation in its deepest sense. Not just changing location, changing the conditions around your becoming. So here is the final recap. First, the safe space that once protected you may eventually become a place of stagnation. Second, outgrowing a container does not make you ungrateful. It makes you honest. Third, misalignment often reveals itself through constriction, silence, heaviness, relational mismatch, and a dimming of your aliveness. Fourth, Wise transition requires truth, structure, and conservation of energy. Fifth, the messy middle is not evidence of failure. It is the training ground between old familiarity and new belonging. And finally, alignment feels like increased access to your real self. Not because life becomes effortless, but because the environment stops demanding your disappearance. That is the checklist. If you want it in one living sentence, go where your truth can breathe, your nervous system can settle, your growth can stretch, and your soul does not have to keep apologizing for wanting more room. Now let this become activation. I want you to stop calling yourself unstable simply because you can feel when a place no longer fits. Stop calling yourself ungrateful because your spirit wants more than maintenance. Stop calling yourself dramatic because your body notices atmosphere. Stop waiting for collapse before you honor the whisper. You do not need a disaster to justify alignment. You do not need everyone's permission to admit that the container is too small. You do not need to betray your next chapter just to prove you are loyal to the last one. Ask yourself honestly, what environment am I surviving that I was never meant to stay inside forever? What room keeps teaching me to shrink? What version of me is trying to emerge? What would it look like to prepare for that version instead of silencing it? Write the answers down. Do not perform them. Do not announce them to people committed to misunderstanding you. Just tell yourself the truth. Then begin. Research, save, pray, plan, simplify, detach, listen, move when wisdom says move. And while you are still in the old environment, stop decorating the cage. Stop feeding it all your hope. Stop giving your future to a space that only knows how to preserve your past. You are not here to become more comfortable in your own diminishment. You are here to become. And becoming requires atmosphere. So let this be the day you stop glorifying what is merely familiar. Let this be the day you stop calling numbness peace. Let this be the day you stop making a virtue out of staying too long. Let this be the day you honor the holy discomfort that has been trying to guide you toward a better fit. Write this over your spirit. I bless what sheltered me, but I do not worship old containers. I release the guilt of outgrowing what once helped me survive. I trust the signals that tell me when my environment no longer fits. I move with wisdom, not panic. I survive the middle without turning back too soon. I welcome the place where my soul can breathe, my gifts can grow, and my life can tell the truth. Carry that into your decisions, because your next level may not begin with more effort. It may begin with more alignment. And if this message found you in a season of restlessness, do not silence it too quickly. Discern it, respect it, test it, prepare for it, but do not bury it. The version of you trying to emerge deserves better than a lifetime inside rooms that only know how to keep you small. So when the time comes, go. Not recklessly, not bitterly, not to prove something. Go because your spirit has learned the difference between being protected and being contained. Go because your life deserves an atmosphere that can hold your becoming. Go because the safe space that is destroying you is no longer worthy of your loyalty. And when you arrive where alignment lives, you will understand something you could not have understood from inside the old container. You were never asking for too much room. You were asking for the right room.